Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Seal from the Campus Theater, and I'd like to welcome you to the third panel discussion from our virtual screening room. Tonight's featured film is Magnolia Films' Slay the Dragon. I'd just like to take a moment to introduce and say thank you to our panel for being a part of this discussion. Cynthia Peltier, director and co-founder of the Community Zone; Carol Cunningham, co-founder and chair of Fair Districts PA; Mary Zimmerman, a retired history teacher; and Jordi Comas, Lewisburg Borough Council member and one of the 18 petitioners in the case of League of Women Voters versus the Commonwealth. My introduction only briefly covers the accomplishments of our guests, but I expect tonight's discussion will uncover many more of their experiences. Before I hand it over to the panel, I would also like to thank everyone tonight on YouTube for joining us, and to everyone who has participated in our virtual screening room and all of our online conversations. We deeply appreciate all of your support in this challenging time and look forward to seeing you as soon as we can. And lastly, the chat room is open, and we'd love to hear from you, your questions, simple hello, and I'll have my eyes open for any questions that might come down the line, and I'll forward them to the panel as soon as I can. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Cynthia Peltier.
Thanks, Andy. First and foremost, I want to thank the staff of the Campus Theater for bringing this film, Slay the Dragon, to Lewisburg. It was a brave move, given the hypersensitive and divided country we seem to be living in right now. In spite of this, I am hoping there are an increasing number of people, not politicians but in the middle of the political spectrum, people who do not believe in the entirety of either political party's platform, but feel forced to identify as either Republican or Democrat in order to actually have a voice. And that the news media is frustrating because it concentrates. Wow, we got to. Okay, so I guess I'll go again. Okay, we got a problem, Andrew.
Okay, 1 second. Sorry about that, folks. Hold on. Okay, go ahead, Cindy.
Okay, so I'll just pick up where I was saying about the news media is frustrating as well, because it concentrates always and reports on the extremes without giving voice to the vast majority of people in the middle. So I am so pleased these particular people have agreed to join me tonight. Besides discussing the film, my hope is to provide insight into how we can get a cleaner system for fair districting going forward, and that we try and speak to that vast middle who may be interested in hearing what these folks have to say today. So before I hand it over to my colleagues for their responses to the film, let me share with you one reaction I did receive. While it says that it is a non-partisan film, it is 100 minutes of unbridled attacks on Republicans and Republican policy. The attempt to paint issues like the Flint water crisis or municipal budgetary issues on Republicans, the movie immediately lost credibility and created a bias that acts to further divide us because we are so hyper contentious. Can I take this moment to go to Carol for her first response to the film?
Yeah, my first response is I agree that it is a film that paints this issue in a partisan way that I think is not particularly helpful. Fair Districts PA, our organization, is nonpartisan, and I started it as vice president of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, vice president for government and social policy. Our organization is nonpartisan. We believe that gerrymandering hurts all of us. It's not so much a red versus blue, Republican versus Democrat issue. It's a people against party leaders issue. And I wish the film had done a better job of making that clear. I think it really did paint the Republicans as the villains. And we know for sure that both parties have done this. In Pennsylvania in 1991, the Democrats did a phenomenal job of gerrymandering the state. The Republicans responded in 2001 with their own version of a gerrymander, and that became an incentive around the country. We were the poster child for Red Map 2011. When I first saw the mention of Red Map 2011 online, the very first words were "in Pennsylvania" in 2001, pointing to the way the Republicans had snagged extra seats in Pennsylvania through gerrymandering. But the truth is, both sides do it. In Maryland, our neighbors to the south, the Democrats have gerrymandered very nicely, and leagues across the country have fought back against gerrymandering in different decades against different parties. But it's always wrong for leaders to draw maps to protect themselves and protect their incumbents. So one thought I had about the movie, and I'll just make a few other short thoughts, and then we'll get to other things. So one thought is, it's unfortunate that it painted it as such a partisan issue when in fact both sides do it, and people need to fight back. Another thought I had was, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a straight path to change as they did in Michigan? Initiative and referendum gives you a clear gather petition signatures, and that's all you have to do. We don't have that option in Pennsylvania, so the path to change is much more complicated, much more difficult, and I'll be happy to talk a little bit about that as we go forward.
Thank you, and I want to thank the Campus Theater for inviting me to participate in this event. I have been very active in the League of Women Voters in the Lewisburg area, and this movie represents in many ways one of the biggest problems that we have to face, because it presents such an uneven and biased approach to the problem of gerrymandering, which is a serious problem. It has deep historical roots. The name gerrymander is itself goes back into the early history of the country. And as Carol has said, it depends on the party in power. Whoever is in power tends to do it. The movie does, however, I think, do a good job of presenting what a grassroots movement can do. And the emphasis on the average citizen attempting to make a political change and being able to pull off that political change is a heartwarming message, even if it is presented in a hyper-partisan sort of way. When Michigan got gerrymandering, their gerrymandering initiative passed, the same year, Ohio had a gerrymandering bill, which was a Republican state. Colorado had a gerrymandering bill, which was a Democratic-controlled state. Utah, interestingly, where 12% of the voters are Democrats, had a gerrymandering state, because the problem was that they were trying to protect the incumbents. And they were cutting up districts to preserve those incumbents. And so often, gerrymandering is presented as a partisan issue, when in fact it should be also seriously regarded as those people who are in power want to keep and maintain that power. And I don't think the film did a very good job of presenting that aspect, which is a more nonpartisan aspect. I enjoyed it. It is very well done, but it is very, very biased.
Thank you, Mary. Jordy.
Well, let me start off. I want to thank the campus theater also for being a place that will be willing to embrace and teach controversy. Oh boy, my dog just came in, so if there's a little background noise, sorry. I thought the film was very interesting. I'm going to start off by saying that I agree with what Carol and Mary said, but I'm going to take a slightly different approach. I mean, I think that the film really wants to focus on a larger set of issues, one of which is a drift towards anti-majority kinds of politics and policies on the part of the Republican Party in the United States. And so there's a Pox on both houses kind of approach. Doesn't really capture the full magnitude of what the film is trying to capture, which is not just gerrymandering as a tool to protect incumbents and protect parties, but also as a way that the Republican Party very clearly saw that the only way that it could continue to wield political power was to deal with the changing demographics in the United States. So, I mean, I think the film can be rightly criticized for not including enough coverage of some of these other grassroots movements, but there's no denying that the efficacy of the Red Map program, and I think the interviews with Kevin Jameson, he was the Republican strategist. I mean, to me, he was like a gold mine for the filmmakers, but he was the one who was really a key architect of the Red Map plan. So I think that the film drew that out, and that is an important part of the story. And to act like both parties do it equally is not, whether or not it's hyper-partisan, it does not reflect the facts as we know them now. And so we need these grassroots movements to bring in people of all different kinds of people, but the magnitude of gerrymandering is not the same between the two parties in this moment and in the last 10 years. That's my take on it.
Yeah, so I guess what I wanted to talk further about is this polarization and how can our government go forward with this severe extreme partisanship in our parties, because there's no, if there ever was, compromise for constructive governance. There certainly doesn't appear to be any now. And how do we get to a place where we can, is it just a two-party system, and is that what's inherently wrong with us? So maybe we could just, jump off on that, if you would, a little bit. Anybody can start.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that, and to address a little bit what Jordy said too. Yes, both parties have done it, but yes, the Republicans did it magnificently in Red Map 2010, and that did fuel, when one party does it, it fuels a certain antagonism. And when they do it even better, it fuels more antagonism. So if you watch what's happening right now in our state house, you have what is actually a majority of the state. The Democrats are by a few percentage points the majority in the state. And yet they were gerrymandered to be an irrelevant minority in the state house. But then you add to that a bunch of procedural rules that force them into irrelevance. And so you have people who feel like we should have a say here, who have no say. And that fuels frustration, it fuels anger, it fuels bitterness, and it just grows and grows. Gene DiGirolamo, Representative DiGirolamo, he was a Republican representative from Bucks County for 20 years. He was a strong supporter of gerrymandering reform. He was a friend of our Fair Districts movement. In his final speech, when he left, he decided to step down. I believe he saw some pretty toxic stuff coming towards us in the next election. And he decided to run for county commissioner instead. In his departing speech, he said, this body works best when both sides have a say and a seat at the table and are heard. This body works best when we compromise and collaborate and work together. And he says, that no longer happens here. It no longer happens here. And he said, we cannot govern unless we end gerrymandering and end the toxic dark money in politics. And he said, until that happens, we can't even begin to get anything done and solve the problems that the people of Pennsylvania need solved. And we're seeing that right now during this pandemic. We're seeing the most hyper-partisan responses you can imagine. And it just kind of spirals out of control. We're saying part of what happens with gerrymandering is you create these safe districts, which are completely, so you've got a very safe Republican district, a very safe Democrat district, and those people don't need to listen to anybody except their most extreme constituents, and they're completely unaccountable except to their leadership, because if they irritate their leaders, their districts will be redrawn to get rid of them, and they know it. So they will do what their leaders want, and they will pander to their most extreme partisan constituents, and they will ignore completely anybody else. And we have legislators who won't even take meetings with constituents who aren't, it's not even that they're not in their party, it's that it's not their most party faithful. They just don't even bother to answer requests for meetings. It's not like they say, oh, I'm busy, I'm sorry. They just don't even answer. And that's outrageous. So it is super hyper partisan.
And Cindy, gerrymandering really reinforces this because, as Carol indicated, the threat to legislatures is in a primary. Mm-hmm. And so they need to cater to their more extreme wings of the party in order to avoid having a primary candidate. So the whole thing just reinforces itself. And it comes back to gerrymandering as the real root of the problem.
I mean, I think the partisanship, hyperpartisanship, is something that it's something that gets bemoaned, it seems, all the time, and so there's two things that are true at the same time that might seem contradictory, but I don't think they are. So it is something that I think Americans, especially sort of the pundit class, like to talk about. And gee, it sure was good in the good old days. It sure was good in the good old days. I like to, I'm not the historian here, Mary is, but, we had a civil war. Like, you don't get much more hyper partisan than that. And I think in the 1840s leading up to it, somebody was murdered on the floor of the Capitol. So we're not doing that.
Yes.
Right. Well, so that's one side. The other side is there is clear evidence that there's, well, I'm not going to say more hyper. This is actually a slightly different thing. This came up in the lawsuit, Legal Women Voters versus the Commonwealth. But one of the things that our lawyers had to show was, what is the effect of gerrymandering? And some of the data they submitted showed that when you take proposals and you put them and you get experts to look at them, so things about healthcare, education, you can put them on a scale from left to right? And then you can sort of say, like, what are the bills that are getting passed? Where are they? They are more than here, more than there. And there was a clear shift over the last 20 years in Pennsylvania that there were more and more bills that people, from both sides of the aisle, this is the way they rate these, would rate as more rightward. So that goes to what Mary is talking about. If you're a legislator, from our area, you don't need to serve your constituents. You have to serve your party leadership, because they're the ones who will decide whether or not you get a district that they're picking the district for you. And maybe to loop all the way back to the question of how do we bring people together, the key thing is, and I think the thing that judges don't get in the loss, and the judges we saw, the Michigan Supreme Court judge, and then the Wisconsin case, I think it was Gill versus Wisconsin was the Supreme Court case, right, in the movie, is that judges, to me, seem out of touch. Like they just seem to think that the only thing that a legislature is this perfect legislative body as it was drawn up in the Constitution, the federal and the state constitutions, and it's not. All legislatures that I know of are deeply enmeshed with political parties, and so much so that we don't even see it. But they're not supposed to be there. Political parties are not part of our Constitution. The primary is a great example. I mean, this struck me just a few years ago, but I was like, the primaries in Pennsylvania, the closed primaries, is basically a function of a private organization. Republican and Democratic parties are not really part of the government, and they yet get the government to run their election for them. I mean, that's extraordinary, right? So part of the solution, and I think this goes to what Carol said about the toxicity in the room and the parliamentary rules, is we need parties to be weaker in Pennsylvania and across the country. And maybe that's a basis for more bipartisanship.
And there are states where they are weaker.
Mm-hmm.
So Pennsylvania, when you look at entrenched party politics, Pennsylvania, I would say, is one of the worst. And in part, it's closed primaries. Mm-hmm. And in part, it's our very hyper partisan gerrymandering process. There are states that have more open, transparent, less partisan processes. But think about the closed primaries. Nationally, right now, the independents are 45%. 45%. So there are more independents than there are Democrats, or Republicans right now. And it goes back to that. People just say, a pox on both your houses. You do not represent me. I don't agree with all of your platforms, but I also don't agree with the way that you're running things. I don't agree with the hyper, my party, right or wrong. No, I want to actually hear from reasonable people who have some level of integrity and some level of competence, and that's who I will vote for, whatever party they are. So if you think, here's an interesting thought though. If nationally it's at 45%, here in Pennsylvania, I believe right now it's at 14%.
Wow.
If those states that had closed primaries opened their primaries, that 45% would go even higher, because I know many people who register as the party that controls their local primary. So if your district is a Republican district, you'll register as a Republican because, as Mary said, the only choice you're going to have is in the primary. So at least give yourself a little bit of choice. I'm a registered independent, so I won't be voting on Tuesday. I'm not doing a mail-in ballot. I don't get a say in the primary. And there are many, many people who deliberately register with a party they don't like, simply so that they can have a say. And the truth is, as Mary said, I think, or as Cindy said, the center is actually much larger than you realize. And if we had open primaries in Pennsylvania, we would see that center much more clearly, and it would force the partisan edges to play back towards the center. Because if independents had a stronger voice, then they wouldn't be able to simply play to the edges as they do. So to me, when I put my League of Women Voters hat on, to me, the three things that are tightly bound together: one is open, the primary system that closed primaries forces hyperpartisanism, gerrymandering, the drawing of district boundaries. And the third is money in politics. When you allow outside money, as Pennsylvania has almost no boundaries on what kind of outside money, and that was part of the conversation surrounding Red Map. If you can take outside money and target state legislative districts and flip those districts and then draw the maps for Congress, you can control Congress for not much money. Rachel Maddow had a great section where she gave out what she called the Genius Award, and she had John Jakowski, who was the
Yes.
mind behind Red Map. She had him on, and she basically gave him a Genius Award. Like, this is genius. You figured out how to control Congress for not much money without having to have a majority. And she asked him, where did you get the best bang for your buck? Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And going back to the film for just real quick, I mean, I thought it was, even though I disagree with everything he did and said, I appreciated that he was at least willing to be transparent, right? He was at least willing to say, this is what it was all about. And
proud of it.
Yeah, proud of it. But at least that helped us get the full story.
And I have to say, when I first started researching this in 2016, it was before some of the big lawsuits had come out. It was before David Daley's book about this Red Map issue had come out. I found an article online, the Wall Street Journal, Karl Rove, saying he who controls redistricting can control Congress, and bragging about what had been done here in Pennsylvania in 2001 and promising what the Republicans would do. And I thought, they're saying this out loud. Is this legal? And then I went and looked at the Red Map website where they bragged, this is what we did. We invested this much money in legislative races in Pennsylvania, and we were able to pick up 3 congressional seats at the same time that Pennsylvania was losing a congressional seat, at the same time that the Republicans didn't have a majority. And they bragged about it online. I was honestly stunned. I thought, this is a really nasty thing to do. It ought to be illegal, and you're proud of it. So it's fascinating to me, the pride that goes into it, and then to be able to have some people say, oh, but gerrymandering really doesn't affect anything, and you think, no, you're bragging that you did this. Obviously, gerrymandering is a big deal, or you wouldn't be putting millions of dollars into it.
I felt that was one of the great weaknesses of the book. It did not deal with the money that was involved and necessary for the initiative. I know that at one point, Katie Fee had to take $800,000 from the Democratic Party and was very reluctant to do it. because she was afraid that it would make it look nonpartisan. And in Pennsylvania, I have no idea what the financial contribution of Arnold and Porter was, but it surely was in the millions of dollars. And you need lawyers and they're expensive. And it makes it even more daunting.
Yeah, I wanted to share a story from the trenches of the if people don't know, then, and I might get the years a little bit wrong. I think it was 2018, right, Carol? The League of Women Voters lawsuit was.
It was decided. It was filed in 2017.
2017, right, and it came out, I think, in January.
Decided in early 2018, in time for the 2018 election.
So one of the things, so as a petitioner, what that meant was I was one of the people it was a class action lawsuit. So there was one person for each congressional district, and sort of through luck, the people organizing the lawsuit found me. So I just want to be clear that I'm not like Katie. It's not like I started a movement. The movement was out there, and I was lucky enough to get to be a spokesperson. But one of the key things is the original lawsuit basically was making the argument that that this map that was drawn in Pennsylvania in 2011 was done for partisan reasons and to exact punishment on Democrats just for being Democrats. And initially, our side wanted to do discovery, and they wanted to get the documents that kind of like was talked about in the film that I think was Michigan. What went into making the maps? Did they have spreadsheets that, for example, showed what the partisan breakdown of a district was? That would have been, that they were using that because their argument was often, no, we're just taking into account other factors. We're not using partisanship, right? So anyway, so this went on and on and on, and the trial that happened, where most of the evidence was presented, was all kind of circumstantial, or they had to rely on a lot of social science experts to say, look, this map could only have been drawn because of partisan reasons, right? Because they didn't actually have the direct evidence. So then it went to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court on appeal, and the other side, which was representing Turzai and I forget the others, but the Republican leaders who drew the maps, their lawyer got up at the beginning and said, of course we drew it for partisan reasons. We're trying to win, right? So in his opening statement in the appeal, he basically admitted to this thing that had been their whole defense. So it was just a fascinating moment of saying, because basically then they shifted their argument away from it has an impact on Democrats, because then they were like, it does have an impact on Democrats, and of course we did it, and we did it because we won, and the winner gets to write the rules and screw it. That was basically the legal logic. He didn't say screw it, but I added that.
Yeah, that is the legal. That's the thing. You can just say what you want to say, and it doesn't have to be rooted in any kind of reality or truth. But so how do we get a cleaner system? Like if we opened up the primaries, that would be one way, of course. There's another thing that, mathematical models have been used, and I don't know, maybe Carol, in our conversation prior to this, you didn't think highly of that. There's a certain amount of mathematical formulas out there that would help us do this more fairly.
I think anybody who's looked at mapping knows that humans have to be part of the conversation. So you can have a mathematical model where you try to draw more compact maps. But look at a state like Pennsylvania. We've got ridges, we've got rivers, we've got highways. And so our argument has been, you need humans who understand what the communities are and what the boundaries are, and that humans need to have a say. Humans need to be able to say, when you go to divide this region, can you think about these things and route instead of those things? So California has an independent citizens commission. That's what Michigan was pushing for, and that's what they will have in the next redistricting. And basically people say, well, who are the independent citizens that will do this? And the idea is just to find a way to balance interests. So you would have the bill that we're supporting, the two bills we're supporting, would create an independent citizens commission, and you would have 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and then 3 independent or third party voters. And those 11 would have to draw a map that somebody from each group would have to vote for. So it wouldn't be like one group could just, say this is it, and the other groups would be shut out. All the groups would have to have a vote within that. And it would also be a transparent process. So the process now for our state House and Senate maps is a 5-person commission. The majority and minority leaders from both houses And then the state Supreme Court chooses a fifth person. So one party, since we have a partisan Supreme Court, one party has 3 members of the 5-person commission. They go in a back room and they draw maps, and they do it to benefit their friends and to hurt their people that they don't like. And they do it to give the party that has the advantage a numeric advantage in our legislature.
And real quick, just to jump in, because this, I think this helps with the League of Women Voters story. You know, the argument often, and you heard it in the movie, was, oh, but see, if you come up with a commission, you're taking the power away from the legislature. No, they're taking the power away from the process that Carol's describing.
Yeah. So that's for the House and the Senate. That's 5 people. It's not all the legislators. It's 4 legislators. And the deciding vote isn't even a legislator. It's somebody chosen by the state Supreme Court. For the Congress, though, you talk about non-transparent. For congressional districts, somebody draws a map. We don't know who does it. And then they hand it to the state legislature, and the leaders say, vote for that. And the last time around, many of the legislators didn't ever see the map. They were given language that said, District 1 will be blank words in the state of Pennsylvania. So that bill was circulated without even the language of what those districts would be until the very last minute. And then that language was put in there, and they were told to vote for it without actually seeing a map. So what we're saying is to have a transparent process where citizens can come and look, citizens can come and offer input. And then once there are proposed maps, people could come and say, seriously, you're dividing Lewisburg in half? My house district divides the town near me, Phoenixville. It divides a precinct in half, splits it right down the middle. My school district is divided into 5 House districts, 3 Senate districts, and it was divided into 2 congressional districts. How do you even have, as a League of Women Voters person, how do you have forums for candidates when you've got so many districts running through each community? So we're proposing an independent commission where the community would have an opportunity to offer input, and there would be boundaries on how many times you can divide a county into different districts. So you couldn't, like our 2011 congressional map divided Montgomery County into 5 congressional districts when it ought to be divided into 1 and a little bit of another. So that would be a constraint. So that's what we're proposing, an independent commission with lots of good rules to keep it transparent, to have public input, and to make it much less gameable in the way that it currently is.
And Carol, the Fair Districts bill, I mean, the commission, does that have final authority, or is it voted on by the legislature at the end?
We do not believe that the legislature should have a final vote.
Okay.
So the commission that we're proposing, that commission does a final decision among itself, and it has to have one from each group. If they can't decide, then there's an elimination vote. So any member of the commission can propose their favorite map. The public can have an opportunity to see any maps that are proposed, and then there would be an elimination vote from within the commission on the votes that are proposed. And so the final decision stays within the commission.
I don't know if people can see that I'm wearing my Fair District shirt. I'm a member of a happy low-level member of Fair Districts. It's a wonderful organization that's just done so much, and Carol, I think, has been modest. But you know, this is a kind of story that before 6 or 8 years ago, you know, we all knew from our history books, but there was nothing like a real people-driven political movement to address this. And so, you know, hats off to her and everybody who's been involved. You know, one thing I think is people kind of see the news and they see, oh, the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania struck down the map. What they did was fix the problem from 2010. They didn't do anything, because that wasn't what the case was about, to fix the process that made that problem. So we shouldn't have any expectation that it'll be any different in 2020, which is why it's so important that people continue to speak out on this, to volunteer, to get involved, and even more so, just so this is clear. I mean, the League of Women Voters versus Commonwealth was about the congressional districts. It didn't do anything about the underlying legislative districts for this Pennsylvania House and state. And we know, Carol knows the Commonwealth really well, but she may not know our little neck of the woods. But, you know, when you look at the 85th, which is the district that Lewisburg is in, and includes most of Snyder County, well, it doesn't include Shamokin Dam. Now, I don't know why. Maybe there was a reason, but if you in this area, it makes no sense. This is a part of one. It's across the river, Carol. So when you drive down to Harrisburg, you go through Shamokin Dam, and then you go through Selinsgrove. So it basically cuts out a part of greater Selinsgrove that's contiguous, and it puts it in the district that's across the river. And in this area, the river is often kind of a boundary between natural communities. So it's just weird, and those of us who are Democrats like me, we don't have any high expectation we'll ever win. And that just bugs me. I'm like, it just makes sense, right? I would want that fixed just because it's not good. It's not good representation. Everybody in Shamokin Dam has to, when they're in this, like you said, the same school district, Selinsgrove School District, if they're trying to petition their representative on an issue, they have to go to two different representatives. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I would say a lot of people were not aware of our state legislative districts. And so I'm going to give a plug. So you can see the sign behind me. Gerrymandering cuts voters out. And that's kind of one of our, it's not that it's red versus, another one of our slogans is not red, not blue, just fair. We're not trying to get a red map. We're not trying to get a blue map. We're just saying, could we have a fair map? Could we have a map that allows our votes to count? So make your vote count. And we've got a great website. We are an all volunteer organization. Everything we do is volunteer driven. We have a website created by a bunch of wonderful volunteers. And if you go to fairdistrictspa.com and look at the problem, there's sections: the problem, the solution, take action. In the problem section, there's a section called maps. And if you go and look at those maps, I promise you, anyone who looks at those maps and spends a few minutes looking at those begins to say, are you kidding me? And you begin to dig in and you say, why in the world did they do this? Why did they carve Pittsburgh up the way that they did? Why did they carve Philly up the way they did? Why are there Senate districts that stretch from somewhere in Lebanon, slice off a little bit of Dauphin County, and end up far beyond York? What is that about? What is the game that's being played here? And the game is control. That's the game. The game is control, and the voices that are heard are the leaders who draw the maps, and the voices that are shut out are every single one of us, no matter what party we're in. We're the ones who are shut out. So look at fairdistrictspa.com. And I also want to say we have a petition. If you text that number, you can sign FDPA.
I'm doing it right now.
Text that number 94253, and then just sign FDPA. It'll take you to a petition you can sign. And if you do that, then you'll get emails and updates from us about what we're doing. And I want to say, so I'll hold that for a second. So it's exciting to see Katie Fahey. She's amazing. And it's exciting to see what they did with Voters Not Politicians. But someday there will be stories about us. And actually, we just finished a 6-part series on PCN. So if you Google PCN Fusion, Fair Districts PA, you'll find a page that has a 6-part series about Fair Districts PA. And we've had over 900 public meetings led by volunteers, attended by over 31,000 Pennsylvanians, where we explain what's happening, why maps matter, how it impacts policy, why we're shut out, and what we're trying to do to fix it. And I want to, if it's okay, I want to just jump back to that, the thing about the Detroit, the Flint, Michigan water, and the way that gerrymandering impacts policy. And the point in that is that when leaders get insulated from the public voice, when legislators from particular districts lose the ability to represent the people in their district, the decisions that are made don't benefit the people. They begin to benefit special interests, or they begin to you don't know why those decisions are made. So for instance, in looking at that, I discovered Pennsylvania actually has 18 cities with worse lead levels than Flint, Michigan. And by a long, much more lead exposure. 18 cities with far worse lead exposure than Flint, Michigan. And for our cities, it's not in the water, it's in the air. And so in Flint, Michigan, they could buy their kids bottled water. It's expensive and it's a pain in the neck, but at least they could give their kids clean water. In our cities, we cannot buy our kids bottled air. We've got 18 cities worth of kids being exposed to lead. And there have been bills introduced, many, many bills introduced across the last decade and a half to address that. And those bills don't even get a hearing. They don't get a vote. They don't move. There are no solutions enacted in Pennsylvania because the legislation is controlled. The legislature is controlled by leaders who are not interested, and they don't answer to the people. I don't know who they answer to, but they certainly don't answer to us. So there's a strong policy impact from gerrymandering, and people need to connect the dots between gerrymandering and what happens in policy in our state.
Cynthia, can I bring up one more?
Go ahead, Jordy.
First of all, I just, everybody should definitely, you know, if you can do anything, get involved with fair districts. It's such an important cause. One thing that I think is kind of an interesting story, and I'm putting a little bit on, you know, I have a former life as a professor. So one kind of interesting piece about the intersection between technology and organizations and people that the film talked about, we haven't mentioned, is that gerrymandering, of course, was there. And I think that the political class in this country had kind of learned to accept it, but nobody quite understood how much the impact of the GIS and data analytic technology was going to be. So that what in the past was a bit of a probably rule of thumb. There was some shots of people like in the 60s or 70s maybe making maps and running old computers, you know, and there were people who probably had some homegrown expertise, but they couldn't do anything like the precision of the maps they have now. So it was kind of like, it was a problem, but it was one our system could handle. And I think one of the points of the film is that these districts, they're so good at predicting how they'll vote, and the lines can be drawn so precisely that it was funny because I've used the phrase, it's you know, it's a problem on steroids, and I think that somebody in the film also used that it went from the minor leagues to being on steroids. But kind of a flip side to that I think is interesting, and I've seen in the fair districts activism I've seen, is there's almost a whole kind of online community of grassroots people who are into maps, making maps, because the data is there and the tools are there. And I think what's the Draw the Lines, is that the name of it, is like a Twitter account that does contests. And like last year it was like a middle schooler who won a contest for like drawing a map that met in certain parameters, like being compact, being contiguous, you have to have equal population. So, and you also saw it in the movie, the one demonstration, the guy I think had Legos and he was using Legos to show. So even though parts of this can get kind of technical, there is at the same time a visual tactile part. And I know that the local fair districts chapter had a jigsaw puzzle, right, at the different pieces. When people see those districts, it just clicks, right? Like Goofy kicking Donald in Pennsylvania the 7th, you look at it and you're like, that's just, that just can't pass muster, right? And it's so bad. I think that was the one, or maybe it was another one, where it was only as wide as one street. And it was at the 7th was part of it. And
in one place there's a seafood restaurant, it narrows down to the seafood restaurant
right
parking lot, and another place it narrows down to a gastrointestinal parking lot. And
yeah,
I live in the, I should have my puzzle here so I can show you. I live in the middle. I live in what was District 6, totally surrounded by District 7. So if I went any direction about 20 minutes, I would be in District 7, and I would have to go through District 7 to get anywhere. And the other end of District 6 would be an hour. I'd have to go through District 7 and through part of 16 to get to the other end of my own congressional District 6.
Yeah. So fun fact, there was a fundraiser for the Public Interest Law Center that was one of the key people that was at that restaurant in the 7th.
I think I was there. I think I might have seen you there.
I actually didn't get to go to that one, but
I did go.
We saw each other.
That far from my house.
But that's something.
A plug for that. Draw the Lines. Draw the Lines is run by a committee of 70 in Philadelphia. They got funding to do a lot of outreach to schools and to do this contest. They've done 3, I believe. Last year they had one fall and spring semester. They had one the fall semester this year, and they had prizes for high school students, college students, and adults. I have to say, I got an honorable mention on the college, the adult level. And basically they provide the tools for people to draw congressional district maps. So if you go to Draw the Lines PA, you can find their website and you can find your way into actually drawing a map. And then there's another mapping app, Dave's District Builder. And I have drawn House and Senate maps as well. And once you begin to draw them, you begin to see, oh, this is what they're doing. And this is what a good map would look like. And you see there are some weird things in Pennsylvania's geography. So some of our cities are not actually contiguous. So Lancaster Township is around Lancaster, so it's not contiguous. There are some places like that. If you take some care, you can still draw contiguous districts, even though the townships themselves are not contiguous. It takes a little bit of work, But it's interesting just to begin to think, how would I make sure that Lewisburg was well represented? How would I make sure that Harrisburg was well represented? How would I think? I mean, Pittsburgh is an interesting place. I've spoken there a number of times now, and people in Pittsburgh, they say, "Oh, I'm not going to, we don't cross the river. We don't, people live in their neighborhoods." And so when you divide those neighborhoods and force them to get to their district office, you've got to cross a bridge and go through a tunnel. People don't, they're not represented because those districts don't represent their neighborhoods. So it's interesting to really look at them and think, what would it be like to have districts that represent people, and how would that change everything? And that's another one of our slogans is, until this changes, nothing changes. So people who want to see things, we have some past legislators who are very active with us, who say, I ran on fixing property taxes back in 1990. We have made no progress on that at all. And until this changes, we won't fix that. There's a long list of things that Pennsylvanians have been begging for 20 years or for 30 years. Until we fix gerrymandering, those things are not likely to get fixed.
I was thinking at this point, we would have a lot of questions coming our way. And I've seen no sign of Andy to be giving us these questions. I think we've presented a lot of information tonight. And unless we don't have any questions, Andy, you've been quiet tonight, so that I'm assuming nobody sent you any questions.
We have a lot of hellos and a lot of thank yous, but there is nothing with a question mark on the end of it. So
I'm wondering if our
positive.
guest would like to do a final, few words, and then we could bid good night. You want to start, Jordy? I'll start with you because you were the last before.
Okay. Well, two quick things. One is, because I was a petitioner, I've been on the radio locally and other things. And so I've had sometimes Republicans say to me, well, clearly this was a partisan effort because, look, it helped the Democrats. And I mean, I understand where they're coming from, but, the initial map in 2011 that was drawn in Pennsylvania was drawn to favor Republicans. So it's not surprising that the thing that was a remedy changed the balance of power somewhat. And the other piece to that is, all of the petitioners, there were 18 of us. One of Robert Smith passed away, so there's 17 now. We all, and everybody involved in the case, we would have rather presented a case that was a Democrat, Republican, and an independent. But the case we were making was that we were being just discriminated against as a class. That's why it was a class action lawsuit. So we had to be Democrats, right? It would have undermined the case itself to have a representation of people. So I just think that those are kind of important facts that might get kind of lost when people look at the League of Women Voters case. But connecting back to the movie, it sends this message that there is a people-powered path, and I hope so. But that seemed awfully hard. And the path we have in Pennsylvania is really hard also, and it runs through our legislature because there is no mechanism for a ballot initiative. So it's a little bit like asking a dragon to not burn down your village. Using a dragon metaphor, and there's no outside party, so it's going to be tough. Like I think that we can do it, but it's going to be tough, and people need to pay attention.
Mary?
Yes, I said I think in my introductory remarks that at the same time Michigan passed their referenda, Colorado, Utah, Missouri, and Ohio also engaged in redistricting reforms. Virtually as we speak, Missouri is busy canceling that because the state legislature felt that it would cause them to give up too much power. In Utah, they have for the last 2 years been in negotiation with the state legislature, and they finally have, I think, worked out an agreement, but the commission will be controlled by the state legislature rather than being a purely citizens commission. So this is a sort of one step forward and a half a step backwards. It took 535 state referenda and initiatives for women to get the right to vote. And gerrymandering is a similar battle. And just have to keep at it and support fair districts and support nonpartisan organizations who try to foster a civil discourse like the League of Women Voters.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say one of the things I strongly encourage people to do is not fall into the trap of labeling. So we have been labeled as, Democrat districts because we are asking for fair districts. And people quickly say, oh, well, that's a Republican idea or that's a Democrat idea. A good idea is a good idea. And what we're seeing right now with this pandemic is people are taking sides in something that should not have sides. I mean, we should all be doing our very best to foster health for all of us and to foster a healthy economy. And the best way to do that is have good information, to be well informed, to trust experts to do their best on our behalf, and to have leaders who have integrity and capability and competence who we can trust. And we don't have any of that right now, and it's harming us deeply. It's harming us physically, and it's harming our economy. And people need to realize that there's an avenue forward, but that avenue requires us to kind of stop labeling and stop going off into our corners. An analogy that I used a while ago, and I keep thinking of it again, is it's almost as if there were two families who for generations have farmed the same field together. And they have brought different equipment to the field and different experience and different perspective, but together they've farmed a healthy field that has fed and nourished everybody. And at some point they decided that whatever the other family planted, they were going to rip up and throw away. And that's what we're seeing. So one side plants something and the other side rips it up and throws away. And then they plant something and the other side rips it up and throws it away. At a certain point, everybody will starve. And unless we can figure out a way to work together, that's kind of where we are. So I would hold up this again and say, join us, Fair Districts PA. We are a group of people who are determined to find the middle, and we are from across the political spectrum. And I love it because we are far more determined to have open conversation about the way that systems work than to try to figure out which party is right. And we are from across parties, and many of us are independents who just want to see the system work well for everybody. We have over 100,000 people who've signed our petition. And as I said, we've had lots of public meetings. We've also been working on getting resolutions passed. And we really encourage folks to go to their local governments and say, let's look at how this harms representation for our local government. And we've had 23 counties and over 360 municipalities pass resolutions in support of an independent commission. So as Mary said, there's no easy avenue forward, but I will give you one interesting little piece of information. So that 5-person commission that I mentioned that draws our state, House, and Senate districts, the 5th person is chosen by the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court in the last 2 decades has leaned Republican. Right now it leans Democratic. And in fact, after the League lawsuit, there were some cries from our state legislature to impeach some of those justices because they were too partisan. Our argument to our state legislators is that court that you were threatening to impeach is going to choose the 5th person for the commission that will be drawing your district maps. So Republicans have a chance right now to fix this. But if they don't fix it, they're the ones who will be harmed in 2021, I guarantee it. Because the toxicity right now, and some of the Republicans say, oh no, it's a friendly process, we get to say what we want, and they draw the districts for us. And I say, they will draw the map to give themselves an advantage, and it will not be to your benefit. So we're in a spot where the political dynamic is such that if we could get enough Republican legislators to really look carefully at the dynamic, they might want to change it. And we're asking them to. Some of them simply don't understand the process. And some of them think, well, it's always been to our benefit, it will be to our benefit again, and it won't be. So we're trying hard to get their attention. We're trying hard to get it changed. It's a tight timeline. And as Mary said, it might not happen now, but we'll keep working because it's too important to let go. We really do need a legislature that listens to all of us, and the only way to get there is to fix gerrymandering.
Thank you.
And
Carol.
thank you so much. I just do want to end by saying thank you for taking this on. It's an important topic, and thank you for providing an opportunity to discuss it.
Well, it's been an honor to be on the same call with the three of you. I think there's a lot of knowledge that's been spread tonight, and hopefully people will take that to think about and get involved, because we have a lot of places to be involved in this community, such as the League of Women Voters, which is a nonpartisan organization. And knowledge is power, and we need to be knowledgeable about what's really happening in order to make that change. So with that, I will thank again the Campus Theater, and Andy particularly, because he's worked hard to make this thing work. We'll bid you all a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
The people draw the lines. The people draw the lines.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.